Word. Morning, everyone. I was thinking about our lesson for this week, and I came across a story of a young priest who had not taken confession as yet and was getting prepared for his first experience in taking confession. And so he's talking to the older father, and he asks some advice from the older father, and the father says, well, think about it this way. When someone comes to you and they've shared with you something that really is heavy on their heart or some experience that they've had, the words that you want to use are things like, I understand. You probably shouldn't say things like, wow. So we think about the importance of words. Words are more than just language. This week, I have received messages from the universe that I am not a great communicator. Now, some of you may be surprised because I feel that I am a great communicator when I get up here on the stage and present these lessons, and I get feedback from the universe that says, yeah, people are really getting this. But one of the things I'm aware of is that oftentimes I think I have communicated something, and I haven't. And it is actually a part of my personality type to think that I have communicated something when I haven't. And one of the things that the feedback that I get sometimes is that I oftentimes am sending out messages, but I'm not waiting to see whether they have been received or heard or understood and connected with. Anybody know what I'm talking about? Anybody have that challenge? So communication is more than just simply using words. It's also paying attention to what is being brought forth from you with those words. There's a power in our words. In fact, in Proverbs chapter 18, verse 21, it says, one of the most remarkable, Eric Butterworth says, one of the most remarkable statements in the entire Bible is, life and death are in the power of the tongue. Life and death are in the power of the tongue. I mean, that's a pretty powerful statement if you think about it. And you and I have a power within us that actually is generated and functions through how we are using our words to focus our attention and to focus our consciousness. And we understand that really our consciousness is really what is creating our experiences out here in the world. Our thinking and our belief systems and our attitudes are all a part of that work that is creating our experiences in the world. And so a part of what happens with our words is that the words are actually, you might say they are like amplifiers in some way, and they are also like a magnifying glass. They put a real focus on what energy that we are tuned into in that moment, in that time, that experience. And so it's, sometimes people think, well, it's just words. It doesn't mean anything. Well, I'm sorry. Words mean something. And when we say something, it has an impact. It has a vibration. And every word that we utter, especially verbally, has an energy and a vibration behind it. And it really will carry the energy and vibration that we are holding in our awareness and our consciousness. The interesting thing is we can say a word that has absolutely nothing to do with what's going on in our feeling, but it still will express what's going on in our feeling. Oftentimes through a tone of voice, oftentimes through an inflection. Does that make sense? And so when we really begin to think about how we are using our words, part of our work is to really begin to pay attention and notice the words that we're using in our life. And really ask yourself the question, is that something that I want to continue to create in my experiences? Now in Unity, one of the things that we teach is the importance and the power of affirmations. How many have ever used an affirmation? How many used it more than once? Okay, good. Because it's not necessarily simply saying an affirmation. I had somebody come to me and say, hey, I said an affirmation a couple of times. Nothing happened, didn't work. Sorry, that's not the way it works. But here's the thing, and one of the things that Eric talks about in this work is that affirmations are not there to make something true. Just because you say something over and over again doesn't make it true. However, it can and will make it true in your experience. So our words don't create something being true, but it will create something that we experience as being true. And so what it's doing is our words are programming our unconscious mind so that we are seeing and experiencing the world, life, ourselves, each other, through the filters of the unconscious mind or the subconscious mind. And because we're seeing through those filters, we're going to see, as Paul said, through a glass darkly. If we're using words that are not necessarily expressing the truth of being, the truth of our nature, then we are actually helping to cloud and create experiences in ourselves and in our life that are basically filters on the truth, that are filters on reality. And the purpose of affirmations is not to try and make something true, but to get us in alignment with the truth that already exists in our lives. With the truth that is already universal, that is already present, that is already working from within us to really bring us into a greater experience of the greater possibilities of our unique creative being and power. We are creative beings. We don't get to opt out of that. It's happening. It's happening right now. And it's happening based upon not just our thoughts, but also on the words that we speak and say in our everyday language, for that matter. And so I think it's one of the things when I was thinking about this is how many of you are familiar with Don Miguel Ruiz's works, The Four Agreements? I think a lot of people are. What's the first agreement? Be impeccable with your word. Powerful understanding. Let me read to you from this. He says, the first agreement is the most important and also the most difficult one to honor. It is so important that with just this first agreement, you will be able to transcend to the level of existence I call heaven on earth. It's that important. It's that powerful. And the first agreement is to be impeccable with your word. It sounds very simple, but it is very, very powerful. Why your word? Your word is the power that you have to create. Your word is the gift that comes directly from God. And the Gospel of John in the Bible, speaking of the creation of the universe, says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Powerful. And if you think about God as this creative force and energy and power and consciousness, and if you are more comfortable with this creative essence throughout the universe, the Word is this creative power. Let me go on a little further because it's really valuable what he's saying here. He says, through the word you express your creative power. It is through the word that you manifest everything. Regardless of what language you speak, your intent manifests through the word. What you dream, what you feel, what you really are will be manifest through the word. And the word is not just a sound or a written symbol. The word is a force. It is the power you have to express and communicate, to think, and thereby to create events in your life. You can speak, and therefore you have the power to create. And one of the things he says in here, which is I think really valuable, he says, be impeccable with your word. And he says the word impeccable means, to be impeccable means without sin. To be without sin in your word. And he defines sin this way: anything that does not align with the truth of your nature. Isn't that a great understanding about what sin really is? When we're not seeing and thinking and speaking words that are not in truth, in expressing the truth of who and what we are, we basically we're sin. We're in sin. Now, there's been a lot of baggage around that word sin, so I'm hesitant to to use that, but I think that definition really helps us to understand it when we are no longer in that state, that we are realigning with the truth of who and what we are. Does that make sense? And so part of our work is to awaken more each day to the truth of who and what we are, and part of the way we do that is to be able to pay attention to and to notice and to align with the essence of who and what we are, and let our words come from that essence, as opposed to the limited concept of who we are that we call our ego. One of the aspects of the ego that Eckhart Tolle talks about is called the pain body. And the pain body is really, in many ways, an energy and a consciousness within ourselves that is a part of our ego consciousness, that is a stored up accumulation of different pains and experiences and traumas and difficulties that we've had in life. And oftentimes, it's not unusual to have our words be at the beck and call of our pain body. And in the result of that, we oftentimes will utter things and say things that we regret. Anybody ever said anything you regret? We all do. But I'm going to suggest to you that's a part of our healing process, to begin to recognize that when we allow ourselves to allow the pain body to express through us, and the pain body comes out when we are in a place that we are hungry, angry, lonely, tired, what's the halts, scared, you guys know what I'm talking about. Yeah, when we're in those places, boy, the pain body jumps out and says, hey, let me take charge of this. I got it, don't worry about it. And then words come out that we look back on and go, oh my gosh, where did that come from? Can't believe I said that. Wish I hadn't. Know what I'm talking about? And then, here's the thing. It's important to recognize that part of our work also, when that happens, is to begin to heal the understanding that that's something that's going on within our nature. And so you guys know that lately I've really been inspired by the work of Matt Kahn. And Matt Kahn teaches this understanding that whatever arises, love that. And it's a powerful healing technique, a healing practice. And so whenever something comes up and the pain body comes up, the idea is not to beat ourselves up for having a pain body, because that's just more pain body. The pain body loves beating itself up. Interestingly enough, it's kind of funny, but it's a circle. It's a cycle, you might say. It's a vicious cycle of, letting the pain body take charge, and then feeling regret and remorse, or feeling guilt and shame, or whatever, and then beating ourselves up because we have a pain body, which the pain body goes, yeah, give me more. Because it creates more pain and more of that energy. It's really how our ego consciousness feeds itself. And so part of our work is to really transform that part of our nature so that we are using our words as a way of not trying to do away with those parts of ourselves that we have difficulty with, but letting them be transmuted by that energy of love. And one of the things that Matt says is that whenever you have that experience of anger, frustration, resentment, all of the challenging kind of emotions that we tend to have in human experiences from time to time, it's not that we're here to shame that part of ourselves, but the reality is transformation happens when we actually begin to say, I love you. Even when I'm angry, even when I've said things I wish I hadn't said, and loving that part of ourselves that feels that way. And if we can do that, we actually are beginning to transform and transmute the energy that's underneath that, so that we can truly begin to hear and not only listen, as Eric Butterworth says, don't just listen to what you say what you're listening to. And what he means by that is to listen inside yourself to what's going on. Listen to that inner dialogue. And listen to where those words are coming from, and find that place within you where you are maybe internally having a conversation or a dialogue that doesn't necessarily need to be expressed out here in the world. Anybody have any of those? And begin to love those parts of ourselves, because in reality, what those voices are doing are trying to help us in some form, in some way, to meet a need that we have not learned an effective and a healthy way of learning how to request and express. One of my favorite works about the power of words is this amazing work from, how many of you are familiar with Marshall Rosenberg? You've heard me talk about Marshall Rosenberg. This is called Speak Peace in a World of Conflict. What you say next will change your world. And so it's really about learning how a way of expressing that allows us to tune into what, one, our emotions truly are going on inside of us, but underneath that, what's the need that we are trying to meet and fulfill? And not only ourselves, but those that we're in relationship with. Because ultimately, every word that we speak is for the purpose of trying to meet some need. And so whenever someone is talking to us and they're having a bad day, whatever, something's going on, and they are letting their words express to us in ways that are perhaps not as loving and kind and caring as you would hope they would be, to put it politically correctly, recognize that if you can get into that space of recognizing that's not the truth of who they are, and it's not the truth of who you are, but it is what Marshall calls a catastrophic strategy for getting needs met. And we all got them. We've all been trained in really some very, we think they work, and sometimes they seem to work temporarily, and they seem to get us what we need and want in the moment. But ultimately, Marshall says, you can get your children to do whatever you want them to do. You can. And they will make you regret it. And I think that's true of all of us. You can use these words to get people to do and think and be and try and act the way you think they're supposed to. But ultimately, it will come back on you. And your children, not especially, will help make you regret it. And thinking about words and how we use our words, Jesus said, "And I say unto you that every idle word that men shall speak, they shall give account thereof on the day of judgment. For by your words you will be justified, and your words will be condemned." So he says that a day of judgment is not some place off in the future that we're going to be, set before the court. That's not what really it is. It's really the results. Ultimately, the day of judgment is simply the results of our creative process. So we will be judged in our creative process by the words that we use, and also the results that they create in our experiences in our lives. So as I said before, you're not really creating truth in the global sense. What you're doing when you're using your words, when you're using affirmations, is that you are aligning yourself with the truth of the spiritual presence and power and whatever's going on in that experience. So one of the things he really says is to pay attention and to the words that we use. He says it's amazing that in the teachings of metaphysics that the tendency is to deal with the power of thought primarily, and that's important. But we don't recognize sometimes that the power of thought is shaped and formed by the words that we use. And so we don't use words in idle ways. One of the Edwin Gaines is an amazing prosperity teacher. How many of you are familiar with Edwin Gaines? He wrote this amazing book called The Four Spiritual Laws of Prosperity. And one of the primary things that she says when you are wanting to experience a more abundant and prosperous life, she encourages you, and I'm using a word that she used, to stop bitching. If you really want to experience prosperity, stop bitching. Now, Will Bowen put it a little more politely in his book, A Complaint-Free World. He quotes her, of course, because he was inspired by that phrase, and he realized for himself that one of the things that he was doing a lot of complaining. And complaining is a tool of the ego that keeps us stuck in a particular pattern of discontent. And if we stay in this particular pattern of discontent, we actually get to draw to us, because we're amazing creative beings, more opportunities to be more discontented. And so the more we use our words to complain about what's going on in our world, the more we draw to us and attract to us experiences like that experience. And so it's so valuable and important for us to realign ourselves. Now, I've heard people say, well, come on, you got to be realistic. And Eric addresses that. He says, if you really want to be realistic, you might say what is in the moment once, and then you say what ought to be in an affirmative way. So think about what ought to be. So something's going on at work, and something's going on with your boss, or something going on with your kids, or something's going on. You know where things go on, right? And you've got some gripe or complaint about that. The more you put your energy into that complaint, you are actually attracting more opportunities for you to complain. And so part of what he says is, think about what ought to be, the way it ought to be. Because we all are thinking that, whether we realize it or not. And so write out what ought to be. Well, the work environment ought to be harmonious. People ought to be more supportive. They ought to be. Got any ought to be's? How many of you got an ought to be? We all do. We all have ways that we think things are supposed to be. We have ways that we think the world is supposed to be. So what he encourages us to do is to take that same statement, and rather than say it ought to be, put it in the affirmative as though it is so now. Now you're going to say, well, that's not realistic. But I'm going to suggest to you, because you are creative, if you're really going to be realistic, and this is one of the things he points out, if you're really going to be realistic, you recognize that you are a divine creative being. And you are in the process of creating that experience that you're complaining about. Whether you recognize it or not, whether you're willing to own it or not, the first step in getting free is to recognize that you have. Here's a good way of understanding it. When you got a complaint and you find that there's things that are going on in your work or other places and things, and you see, especially if you see a pattern, ask yourself, what's the common denominator in this? We're the common denominator. And it's coming through our filters of our way of thinking and seeing, and also our way of speaking in life. And so if you want something to show up differently, you don't continue the same pattern of thinking and complaining and griping and limiting thoughts and ideas and beliefs and talking about how you don't have, or you really begin to think about what you want to experience, and you create words, affirmations, that are in alignment with the truth of that possibility. And you begin saying those things not only to yourself, but you begin saying them out loud. You begin saying them, Louise Hay says, say them in the mirror 100 times. You look in your own eyes and you say these words, and you're not necessarily trying to create something that is not untrue. You're trying to align yourself with the truth of the possibility. And in the process, you begin to transform your subconscious mind so that you begin to see things differently, and you begin to experience things different. You begin to experience life and people and circumstances through the eyes and the awareness of a higher level of being, a higher level of understanding, a higher level of consciousness. And in the very act of doing that, you are attracting to you what you are holding in that awareness, and you use your words to help yourself align with that greater possibility. One of the things Eric really says to us is to really pay attention to the words we use and do not put into words anything that we do not want to experience more of in our life. So he says it becomes logical that it is simply not good sense to put into words or to formulate into verbalism that which you really do not want to manifest in your life. And I'm going to suggest that you really notice and pay attention not only to the words that you're using about a circumstance or situation or about yourself, but also the words that you use in connecting with and relating to others. Don Miguel Ruiz says that gossip is absolutely one of the most difficult spells to break. Now, a spell he calls using our words in negative ways about ourselves or about others. He calls it black magic. We're actually putting a spell. And so he gives an example of a young child who was singing, and her mother goes in and says, "Oh, would you stop that? You have the ugliest voice." She never sang again. The mother put a spell on her, a belief system into her consciousness that unfortunately she didn't have the ability to deny at that point, because the mother was the ultimate authority. And so it's really important for us to not only pay attention to the words that we use for ourselves and about ourselves, but especially with our children, but especially with the people around us. And in using our words, even if we're not saying it directly to that person, in some ways that's even worse. So if you're talking about someone in a way that is not lifting them up and seeing them as their true being and their true nature to someone else, Jesus said, where two or more agree upon a thing, it shall be established for them. And so those two people basically are casting a spell on this person that is having an effect. And the important thing to realize is when you talk about someone when they're not present, you are absolutely creating an energy that's going to come back to you. As you sow, so shall you reap. So I don't want to get too much heavier with this, but I want us to really notice and pay attention to the importance of the words that we use in our lives. And especially to pay attention to how we are allowing our words to shape and form our experiences of reality. True reality is really the essence of our nature, which is our spiritual being. And we want our words to continually be words that allow us to move into a greater experience and knowing of our oneness and our wholeness with the beauty and the grace and the love and the power and the peace that's possible in this world and in us. But it starts not by changing something out there. It starts by paying attention to the words and listening to the words that are going on inside of us, the self-talk, and then letting our spoken words be reflective of those things that are great possibilities of health and of life. You know, one of the challenges that one of the things we've often been taught to do in this world, in this culture, is to have a regular organ recital. Do you know what I'm talking about when I mean an organ recital? We talk about this organ or that organ and all the problems we're having with this organ and that organ. When we start complaining and talking about all of our illnesses, we are actually helping to continue the illness. So you should only talk about your illness to those who are in the process of helping you to transform and heal that. Does that make sense? It's not to be a part of everyday conversation. It's to be a part of a conversation that's about healing and transformation. And so when people ask you how you are, you can say, I'm healing. We have a tendency to want to get into the specifics. And I'm going to suggest to you that you're actually amplifying or continuing that energy that is helping to create that circumstance in the same way. The same thing is true with our abundance and prosperity. We find ourselves continually talking about, I don't have, I don't have. The universe is such a loving, powerful universe that it will actually give you more of I don't have. You can have all the I don't have you ever wanted. And so you stop putting your energy into I don't have and really begin to focus on a knowing and an experience of having. These are the powers that we have to use. He quotes Proverbs that says, "Set thou a seal upon my lips." And what that really means is to really watch all of the words that we're using in our lives and ask ourselves the question, is this something that I want to continue? Is this something that I want to create more of? Is this something that I want to enhance? Is this something I want to amplify in my experience and in my life? And if it's not, then you change the words. It's not being unreal, it's being real to the understanding that you are creating your experiences. That make sense? So that's our lesson for this week. We got some homework. So one of the things that Eric says in his book that he gives homework. I like homework also. So for the next 7 days, you ready for your homework? Yep. We're going to go on a verbal diet. You guys ready to go on a verbal diet? He says, I'll give you a homework assignment. This is not going to be easy. It's very simple, though. Dieters and religious communicants quite often go on fasting. They do fast. And so you're going to be invited this week to go on a verbal fast. That doesn't mean that you don't say anything, but you don't say anything that you do not want to continue to enhance or experience in your life or in your world, either for yourself or someone else. Because reality is, whatever you're putting out there for someone else, you're also putting out there for yourself. You guys ready for a 7-day verbal diet? And so you pay attention to the words that you're using. You pay attention to what you're putting out there. And the challenge, he says, challenge yourself to go on 7 day on a verbal diet where you're going to think before you speak. Amazing concept. Think before you speak. You're going to listen before you articulate things. You're going to try to put into words only those things that you want to see manifest in your life. Let me say that again. Say only those things that you want to see manifest more of in your life. I'm going on it this week. I can't promise that I will always be faithful to it, but I'm going to work at making sure that the words that I say, as the scripture says, are acceptable in the divine heart and mind, that are more clear and more loving and more compassionate and more understanding and more prosperous and more abundant and more healthy and whole. And the more we do that, and the more we turn away from trying to get the world to change, begin changing our concept, our view of the world changes. And you and I are a part of that. So let's move into our meditation time.
May the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be pleasing to you. Yes, be pleasing to you. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart pleasing to you, oh my God. You're my rock and my redeemer. You're the reason that I sing. I desire to be a blessing in your eyes. Every hour and every moment, Lord, I want to be your servant, and I desire to be a blessing in your eyes, in your eyes, ooh, in your eyes.
So let us be still for a moment and bring things into a true spiritual context. All things begin with the basic one. The creative logos, the creative power. And you and I are one with that creative power. The logos, the word. It's not that we just like to say to ourselves that we're spiritual beings, but we like to remember that at the ground of our being, that each and every one of us is a spiritual being. And as a part of that, we are creative beings. And it's always true, and it's always happening, it's always going on. Whether we articulate or speak it or not, we are creating. And so when we listen, before we express ourselves, we listen for that still small voice of Spirit that is always speaking to us words of power, of peace, of passion, of compassion, of light. And that still small voice is always saying to us, let a good word be said. Let a good word be said in this moment, in this time, this situation, this circumstance. What is the good that I can express in this life, in this possibility? We listen in the consciousness before we speak, before we face people, before we get involved in any experience or relationship. We first remember who we are. And then we allow this consciousness to be embodied and expressed in our thoughts and in our words. We project these words in positive power. And we recognize that ultimately the words that we speak from that place are not our words. As Jesus said, it is not I, but the Spirit of God within that does the work. And so we allow the presence of Spirit to express truth. wherever we go and whatever we're doing, whether we're taking an Uber, or we're walking down the street, or we're going into a shop, or whatever we are participating in, that the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be pleasing to that divine light of spirit. And as we do, we know that we not only will see the truth, but we will know the truth, and the truth will set us free of that circumstance, of that situation. And we give thanks for the creative power at work in and through us. Thank you, thank you, thank you, blessed Spirit. Take a nice deep breath now. Breathing into the heart space, give thanks knowing that we are tuning ourselves to that amazing creative power that is love. And we choose to let our words express that in some form, in some way, because ultimately that is the need that we are all wanting to experience and fulfill in our lives. And so it is. Take a nice deep breath now. Move around a little bit. When you're ready, gently open your eyes. Be present here and now in that energy. And so it is. Amen.